Shalom, 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 everyone. This is Joy, and today is Tuesday, April the 18th, 2023. And the title for today's lesson is, Whose covenant are you under? Abba Yahuwah's or one of another nation? Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started, and we're going to look at Exodus chapter 34, verse 12 through 15 first. So let's turn there. Okay. Exodus chapter 34, verse 12 through 15 reads, Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be for a snare in the midst of thee. But ye shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves. For thou shalt worship no other Elohim, for Yahuwah, whose name is jealous, is a jealous Elohim. Lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they go a-whoring after their gods or Elohims, and do sacrifice unto their Elohims, and one call thee, and thou eat of his sacrifice. Okay? So, what I want to point out in verse 12 is where he said, if you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, that is going to be a snare in the midst of thee. So at the top, I put covenant with the inhabitants of the land equals a snare, okay? And then if you look that word up, snare, in the Strong's Concordance, it's going to be the word, it's H4170 is the number, and then the Hebrew word is makash or makashi. I'm not sure how to pronounce it exactly right, but we'll just say makash, okay? And that word means bait, lure, snare. And it says a noose for catching animals, hook, or trap, okay? And those are very significant words. So just remember, a snare is something that's going to be used as like a noose to catch an animal. And a type of snare that can be used is a hook or a trap, okay? All right, and then in verse 15, I wrote down, covenant with the inhabitants of the land equals whoring after their gods, sacrifice unto their gods, eat of his sacrifice, okay? That equals the verse that I used from the last lesson, which was called, eat not the bread of an evil eye, okay? So let's look at that again. So let's look at Proverbs chapter 23, verse 6 through 7. Okay. All right, Proverbs chapter 23, verse 6 and 7 reads, Eat thou not the bread of him that hath an evil eye, neither desire thou his dainty meats. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Eat and drink, saith he to thee, but his heart is not with thee. Okay? And the significance of that verse, I was trying to show you in the last lesson. I said that where it says, eat not the bread of him that has an evil eye, remember that word bread means doctrine, okay? And that was found in Matthew chapter 16, verse 5 through 12, okay? And that's where Yahushua was telling his disciples, he said, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees, okay? There was another place where he says, beware of the leaven of Herod also, okay? But that's another verse. You can go Google that if you want to. But there's three different leavens he mentioned throughout the Bible where he said, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and of Herod, King Herod, okay? But right now, we're just going to focus on the leaven of the Pharisees, okay? So that was the example I gave in the last lesson. And the leaven of the Pharisees is the false doctrine of holding their traditions over Abba Yahuwah's commandments, okay? And that was found in Mark chapter 7, verse 5 through 13, okay? And the emphasis was verse 9. So let's look at that real quick because I just wanted you to see that again. Okay, Mark chapter 7, and it was verse 5 through 13, but let's look at verse 9 because that was the main point. So Mark chapter 7, verse 9 reads, And he said unto them, so this is Yahushua speaking unto the Pharisees, he said, Full well ye, the Pharisees, reject the commandments of Yahuwah, that ye may keep your own tradition. Okay, so that's the leaven of the Pharisees. keeping their own traditions, their own man-made traditions, over or instead of Abba Yahuwah's commandments, okay? All right, so that's key. Remember that. Alrighty? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I want to show you a modern day example of leaven or false doctrine or a snare, okay? So what's this modern day example of leaven, false doctrine, or a snare? Okay, so one modern day example would be the day that you set aside to worship or rest on, okay? So typically in the West, in the Western world, most churches or religions worship on the first day of the week, which is Sunday, okay? All right, and then in the Eastern world, you do still have some people that worship on Sunday, but there's other major religions that set aside their day of rest and worship on Friday, okay? Now, there are some people sprinkled throughout the world that do keep the Sabbath. So there are some people that do still keep the Sabbath. But like I said, the majority of the world in the West worships on Sunday, the first day of the week. And then in the Eastern world, they worship on Friday, which is the sixth day of the week. Okay? All right. So that's a modern day example of leaven, false doctrine, or a snare. Okay? All right. So if that's a day that they set aside to worship, that man has created from their own man-made traditions or doctrines to either worship on Sunday or Friday, well, let's see what our Creator said, okay? So now we're going to look at Abba Yahuwah's covenant day of rest of worship, or rest and worship, which is the Sabbath, okay? And that's the seventh day of the week, all right? So for that, let's look at Exodus chapter 34, verse 21. Okay. Exodus chapter 34, verse 21 says, 6 days thou shalt work, but on the seventh day thou shalt rest. In earing time and in harvest thou shalt rest. Okay? So we know that 6 days of the week, you begin to count on Sunday. That's the first day of the week. And then you count 6 days. The sixth day of the week is Friday. And then the seventh day is Saturday, which is the Sabbath. Okay? All right, so now let's look at Leviticus 23 and verse 3. Okay, Leviticus 23 and verse 3 reads, 6 days shall work be done. Okay, so that's Sunday through Friday. So 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is the Sabbath. And it's the Sabbath of rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of Yahuwah in all your dwellings. Okay? So 3 things that are very important about this verse that explains what the Sabbath is. It says, okay, it's the seventh day, and it's a day of rest. It's a holy convocation, and a holy convocation means a holy gathering or assembling of all the believers of Yahuwah, okay? And it says it's the Sabbath of Yahuwah. So the Sabbath is Abba Yahuwah's day, okay? That's who this day belongs to. It doesn't belong to any one man or person or being. It's his day that he set aside at the very beginning of creation. And you can find that in Genesis. That was his day that he set aside. So let's be clear that the Sabbath day belongs to Abba Yahuwah, okay? That's his day of rest and a holy convocation, okay? Alrighty. Let's see. Okay, yeah. And that was the end of that verse there. Okay. So those are the 3 things that it was important to see about the Sabbath, okay? The seventh day. It's a day of rest, a holy convocation, and it's the day of Yahuwah, okay? All right, so now let's turn to Ezekiel chapter 20. So turn there. Okay, Ezekiel chapter 20, and we're going to read verses 12 through 13, okay? And it reads, Moreover, also I gave them my Sabbaths, to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am Yahuwah, that sanctify them. Okay. All right, we'll keep reading. But the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They walked not in my statutes, and they despised my judgments, which if a man do, he shall even live in them. Okay. And my Sabbaths they greatly polluted. Then I said, I will pour out my fury upon them in the wilderness to consume them. Okay? All right, so verse 12, the new thing that we're seeing about the Sabbath is he said, I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign. So the Sabbath is also a sign. And what is this sign? It's a sign between the children of Israel and Abba Yahuwah, so that they may know that he is Yahuwah that sanctifies them. So the Sabbath is a sign to let you know that that's how Abba Yahuwah sanctifies you. When you keep that day, the Sabbath, that's how you're being sanctified. Because the day that he set aside, the Sabbath, it's sanctified as well. Because that's what sanctified means. It means to be set apart and to be made holy. So if the Sabbath day in and of itself is set apart and is made holy, well, that's what happens to you when you keep that day. You're set apart now and you are made holy by keeping the Sabbath, okay? So that's what I want you to get from that verse. And then in verse 13, he says, which if a man do, he shall even live in them. So when you keep this day, this holy day, that's Abba Yahuwah's, the Sabbath, that's how you get life, okay? So the Sabbath is very important. So just make sure that you understand it's a sign between you and Abba Yahuwah when you keep it. And it lets you know that now you're being sanctified by the Father when you keep it, because he's setting you aside and making you holy the same way that he does the Sabbath day, okay? Alrighty. And that's how you get life. Alright, so now let's look at Ezekiel 20, verse 19 and 20. Alright, so if you look a little further, verse 19 through 20 reads, I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. Walk in my statutes and keep my judgments and do them. And hallow my Sabbaths, which means to make them holy, and they shall be a sign between me and you, that ye may know that I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. So when you keep the Sabbath, that is a direct correlation between you and the person that you're worshiping, which is Abba Yahuwah. So keeping the Sabbath essentially shows, it's an outward showing of who you worship, who your true Elohim is. So those that keep the Sabbath, they are proclaiming that they worship the true creator of this world, which is Abba Yahuwah, okay? And that's another reason why it's so important to keep the Sabbath, okay? Alrighty, so now let's move on to Exodus chapter 31. So let me turn there. Okay, Exodus chapter 31, and let's look at verse 12 through 18. Okay, and it reads, And Yahuwah spake unto Moses, saying, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am Yahuwah that doth sanctify you. Ye shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Every one that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from amongst his people. 6 days may work be done, Sunday through Friday, but in the 7th is the Sabbath of rest, holy to Yahuwah. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Yahuwah made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. Okay? And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of Yahuwah. Okay? So from these verses, I wanted you to see that it's also a perpetual covenant. So the Sabbath day is a perpetual covenant in and of itself, okay? So the children of Israel were commanded to keep the Sabbath throughout their generations forever, okay? So this is not an option. This is not something that, oh, well, we don't have to do this anymore. We're not commanded. No, the children of Israel were commanded to keep it forever throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant, okay? So this is something that's supposed to be done forever. Okay, so now let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 5. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 5. Let's turn there. All right, and we're going to look at verse 12 through 15. Okay, and it reads, Keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it, as Yahuwah thy Elohim hath commanded thee. 6 days thou shalt labor, and do all thy work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of Yahuwah thy Elohim. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thine ox, nor thine ass, nor any of thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates, that thy manservant and thy maidservant may rest as well as thou. And remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and that Yahuwah thy Elohim brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore Yahuwah thy Elohim commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. Okay? So from these verses, I wanted to show you that the Sabbath is a day of rest for all and a day of remembrance of deliverance from Egypt. Okay? And that was something kind of new that I just started seeing, because the first thing, of course, when everybody asks what's the Sabbath day, of course, everybody's going to say up front it's a day of rest and worship, right? But I forgot these verses that says it's a day of remembrance of deliverance from Egypt. So that's another thing that's important about the Sabbath, is that when you keep it, it's supposed to remind you that this was an important day, because it shows, or it's supposed to remind you of Yahuwah's mighty hand and how he took us out of Egypt. And we know that the word Egypt is synonymous with bondage and slavery, okay? So keeping the Sabbath is a beautiful thing, because it's showing you that not only did he take the children of Israel out of bondage, slavery from Egypt in a physical sense, but when you keep it, you're being taken out of your Egypt or bondage or slavery in the spiritual sense, okay? Because I mentioned before that when you keep the Sabbath, that's when your eyes are going to be open, spiritually speaking, okay? So that's how you're set free and delivered from your bondage and slavery of sin, when you keep that day of the Sabbath, okay? All right, so now let's look at Leviticus chapter 26. All right. Leviticus 26, and we're going to look at verse 32 and 35. Okay, and it reads, And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths, as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemy's land, even then shall the land rest, and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate, it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths when ye dwelt upon it. Okay? So I wanted to show you here that the Sabbath was also for the land. So the land was supposed to have rest as well. So just like in the verses above, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 12 through 15, I forgot to mention in that verse, the Sabbath was not only for the Israelites, but it was for their servants and the strangers that joined to them. And it was also for the animals, okay? Because he said, the ass, none of thy cattle or thy oxen should work on that day either. Everything was supposed to rest. So the Sabbath is not only for man, but it's also for animals. And now we're seeing in Leviticus 26 that it was also for the land, okay? So let's look at that further. So let's look at Exodus chapter 23, verse 10 through 13, just to confirm that. Okay, Exodus 23. Oh, let me go back a little bit further. Okay, Exodus 23 and verse 10 through 13 reads, And 6 years thou shalt sow thy land, and shalt gather in the fruits thereof. But the 7th year thou shalt let it rest, and lie still, that the poor of thy people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field shall eat. In like manner thou shalt deal with thy vineyard, and with thy olive yard. 6 days thou shalt do thy work, and on the 7th day thou shalt rest, that thine ox and thine ass may rest, and the son of thy handmaid and the stranger may be refreshed. And in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other Elohims or other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth. Okay? So that was just confirmation that the Sabbath was not only for mankind, but it was for animals, and it was for the land. And then if you noticed in that last verse 13, he said, and make no mention of the name of other gods. So, you're not even supposed to be letting that slip out of your mouth, okay? All right. Now let's turn to Isaiah chapter 56. So we're going to see something else again that we already saw in these last verses, but it's going to be pointed out again. So Isaiah chapter 56, verse 1 through 8 reads, Thus saith Yahuwah, Keep ye judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that doeth this, and the Son of Man that layeth hold on it. Okay, so what is it? What is he talking about? He says that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and keepeth his hand from doing any evil. Neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to Yahuwah speak, saying, Yahuwah hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, Behold, I am a dry tree. For thus saith Yahuwah unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths, and choose those things that please me, and take hold of my covenant. Even unto them, he's talking about the eunuchs, even unto them will I give in my house, and within my walls, a place and a name better than that, or better than of sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Also the sons of the stranger that join themselves to Yahuwah to serve him, and to love the name of Yahuwah, to be his servants, every one that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and taketh hold of my covenant, even them will I bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon my altar, or mine altar. For mine house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. Okay? Yahuwah Elohim, which gathereth the outcasts of Israel, saith, Yet will I gather others to him, besides those that are gathered unto him. So the two main things I wanted you to get out of those verses was verse 7 at the end, where he said, My house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. So that clarifies right there that the Sabbath is for everyone, okay? Because people keep wanting to say, oh, it's just for the Israelites. They were the only ones commanded to keep it. No, it was for the Israelites, and now we're seeing it was for eunuchs. It's for strangers, and strangers includes everyone else other than the nation of Israel. And then we saw before, it was for animals, and it was for the land, okay? So that should settle that the Sabbath was made for everyone. And that's why Yahushua said, I'm Lord of the Sabbath, or he's the Adonai of the Sabbath. He said the Sabbath was not made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man, okay? So essentially the Sabbath is our gift, okay? It's a gift to all of Abba Yahuwah's creation, okay? All right, and then in verse 8, when he said, Yahuwah, which gathered the outcasts of Israel, saith, Yet will I gather others to him, besides those that are gathered unto him. That is going to be found in John chapter 10, verse 16. So let me turn there real quick and I'll read that. Let's see. And that's where Yahushua says he's the good shepherd, right? So when Yahushua, after he gave the speech about how he's the good shepherd, in verse 16, Yahushua said, And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, meaning other nations other than Israel, okay? He says, Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd, okay? So when Yahushua said that, he was speaking about other nations other than Israel, which is what Abba Yahuwah calls strangers, okay? But these people have joined themselves to Abba Yahuwah. So in that sense, once they've joined themselves to Abba Yahuwah, they're no longer considered a stranger because they're one of his, okay? And so that one fold and the one shepherd, they're all going to be doing the same thing and keeping the same commandments, okay? And that's the Sabbath day. That day that Abba Yahuwah said to set aside and keep as a holy convocation, the day of rest and worship, is the Sabbath. So everyone who's one of Abba Yahuwah's children are commanded to keep the Sabbath, okay? Alrighty, so now, let's see here. Okay, so I wrote down question. I said, what is Abba Yahuwah's covenant? Okay, so the answer is, it's Abba Yahuwah's words, which is his law, which is his commandments, plus the faith and the testimony of Yahusha, okay? So let's look at that first. Let's look at Abba Yahuwah's words, law, and commandments that makes a part of his covenant. So for that, we're going to look at Isaiah chapter 55, verse 1 through 3. So Isaiah 55, 1 through 3 reads, Ho, every one that thirsteth, come ye to the waters, and he that hath no money, come ye, buy and eat. Yea, come buy wine and milk without money, and without price. Wherefore do you spend money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which satisfies not? Hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and let your soul delight itself in fatness. Incline your ear, and come unto me. Hear, and your soul shall live, and I will make an everlasting covenant with you. Okay? So he's talking about this everlasting covenant, okay? Alrighty, so now let's look at Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1 through 3, and then 7 and 8. So let's turn there. Okay, Isaiah 61, verse 1 through 3 reads, The Spirit of Yahuwah Elohim is upon me, because Yahuwah hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahuwah, and the day of vengeance of our Elohim, to comfort all that mourn, to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called the trees, or it might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of Yahuwah, that he might be glorified. Okay? And right there where it says that they may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of Yahuwah, that's going to be my very next lesson. Okay? It's going to be called the planting of Yahuwah. But anyway, so I just thought that was interesting. But the whole purpose of all this, for us to, keep Abba Yahuwah's commandments and be in his covenant, is so that he might be glorified, okay? That's the whole purpose of all this, is that all the glory and praise goes to our Father, all right? And so now let's go to verse 7 and 8. So verse 7 says, For your shame, and he's talking about Israel, for your shame ye shall have double, and for your confusion they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore in their land they shall possess the double. Everlasting joy shall be unto them. Hallelujah. Can't wait for that. Verse 8, For I, Yahuwah, love judgment. I hate robbery for burnt offering. And I will direct their work in truth, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them. Okay? So here's this word, everlasting covenant, again. Okay? Alrighty. So now, let's look a little bit deeper about this, or into this everlasting covenant. So this is going to tie back to Jeremiah 31, verse 31 through 34. So let's look at that. Let's see what this everlasting covenant is. Okay, so Jeremiah 31, verse 31 through 34 reads, Behold, the days come, saith Yahuwah, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was a husband unto them, saith Yahuwah. But this is the covenant, but this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith Yahuwah. I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. and they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know Yahuwah, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith Yahuwah. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Okay? And the equivalent of that verse is found in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 1 through 13. So you can go read that, but it's the same thing. But now I want to take you to Revelation chapter 14. So let's turn there. Let's see. Okay, Revelation chapter 14, and let's look at verse 6 and 7. Okay, so it reads, And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, and kindred, and tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear Yahuwah, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven, and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters. Okay? So what I wanted you to see there was, before we saw the word everlasting covenant in those verses above in Isaiah chapter 55 verse 3 and in Isaiah 61 verse 8. Now we're getting this word that the angel proclaims. He calls it the everlasting gospel. Okay? All right. So that's going to connect over to the side where it says I'll be Yahuwah's covenant. It's also the faith or the testimony of Yahusha. So let's turn to Isaiah chapter 42. Verse 6. So let's look at that real quick. Okay. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 6 reads, I, Yahuwah, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles. Okay? And if you understand with this verse, he's speaking about Yahusha, okay? He says he's going to give Yahusha as a covenant of the people and for a light to the Gentiles, okay? Now let's look at Isaiah chapter 49, verse 6. Okay. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 6 reads, And he said, It is a light thing that thou shouldest be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob, and to restore the preserved of Israel. I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles, that thou mayest be my salvation unto the end of the earth. Okay? So essentially it's saying the same thing, but he's just repeating that Yahusha, he said he's going to be his servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved of Israel, and he's going to be a light to the Gentiles. Okay? All right, so now let's look at Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26. And if you hear noise in the background, my son, he is over here at the door. Okay, baby, I'm recording. Hold on. Okay, Matthew chapter 26, verse 26 through 29 is what we're going to look at next. Okay, and it reads, And as they were eating, Yahusha took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, Take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the New Testament. And remember, I showed you in a previous video that really should say, This is my blood of the New Covenant. Because the word testament, when you look it up in in the Strong's Concordance, that word testament is the exact same as covenant. So that's what ties back to Jeremiah 31, verse 31 through 34, and Hebrews 8, 1 through 13, okay? So 28 again, he says, This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. All right. So verse 28 is the emphasis on there, because that's where it shows it's the blood of the new covenant, and this is Yahusha's death, burial, and resurrection being illustrated, okay? So this is what he was doing when he took that bread, blessed it, and broke it, and then gave them the fruit of the vine and blessed it and broke it. He was essentially illustrating his death, burial, and resurrection, okay? All right, so now let's look at Isaiah chapter 52. Let's go back there again. Let's see Isaiah 52. And we're going to look at verse 7 and 8. And it reads, How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace, that bringeth good tidings of good, that publisheth salvation, that saith unto Zion, Thy Elohim reigneth. Thy watchmen shall lift up the voice, with the voice together shall they sing, for they shall see eye to eye, when Yahuwah shall bring again Zion. Okay? So good tidings was the word that I wanted you to see there. Okay, and I apologize, everyone. I'm going to pause for a second so I can take care of my son, and I'll be right back. Okay, everyone, I am back. I'm so sorry that I had to stop like that. But life happens. So anyway, I think I finished reading Isaiah 52, verse 7 through 8, and Isaiah 61, verse 1 through 3. So I read those verses, and then the next verse I was going to go to was Luke chapter 4, verse 18 through 19. So let's read that. And if I already read it, I apologize, because I can't remember where I stopped. But anyway, Luke chapter 4, verse 18 through 19 reads, and this is Yahushua speaking, The Spirit of Yahuwah is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of Yahuwah. So the reason why I added that verse is because essentially Yahushua is, he's basically proclaiming what we just read in Isaiah, correct? But what's interesting is where the word in Isaiah said good tidings, Yahushua says in verse, it was verse 18, he says, He hath anointed me to preach the gospel. So that's what I was trying to show you, is that in Isaiah's version where he said good tidings, Yahushua says the gospel. So those good tidings is the gospel. And that's how that connects back to Revelation 14, verse 6 through 7, where it said in verse 6, he has preached the everlasting gospel to all kindreds, nations, and tongues and people, okay? So that everlasting gospel is the good tidings, which is the gospel, okay? Alrighty, so now let's turn to Isaiah chapter 42. So let's turn there. Okay. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 1 through 4 reads, Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. He shall not fall, nor be discouraged, till he has set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for his law. Okay, so what I wanted you to see from that verse was verse 4. At the very end, he said, He shall not fall, nor be discouraged, till he has set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for his law. So his law is what we're going to be waiting on, or what the isles are going to wait on, okay? So his law, I want you to see that, because that goes right along with the other verses above, where it says, I'll be Yahuwah's covenant. It's his word, which is his law, which is commandments, okay? And that's what it said right here, the isles shall wait for his law, okay? And this is speaking about Yahushua, okay? Because it says he upholds his servant in verse 1. So all this verse is talking about Yahushua, okay? Who is sent into the earth, okay? And the isles are going to wait for his law. Okay, and then if you look at Isaiah chapter 42, verse 6 through 9, it reads, I, Yahuwah, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles, to open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. I am Yahuwah, that is my name. and my glory will I not give to another. And he's speaking about his servant. He's not going to give his glory to anyone else other than his servant, which is Yahusha. Okay? Neither my praise to graven images. Behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things Behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things do I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Okay? So the emphasis was on verse 6 there, where he says, he will keep thee, or speaking of Yahusha, and give him as a covenant of the people and a light of the Gentiles. So from this whole chapter, from this one chapter, Isaiah 42, verse 4 is talking about Abba Yahuwah's law, and then verse 6 says that Yahusha is the covenant of the people and a light to the Gentiles. So that's how I got my answer to that question that I answered, or the question that I had above. What is Abba Yahuwah's covenant? His covenant is his word, which is his law, which is commandments, and it's the faith or testimony of Yahusha. Okay? Alright, so I got one more question. At the very bottom I put, what day do the saints keep? So as we're speaking about what day we should worship on and set apart and keep as a holy convocation, the question I had was, what day do the saints keep? Alright, so let's look at that. So the answer is going to be in Proverbs chapter 2, verse 6 through 8. So let's turn there. Let's see. Okay, Proverbs chapter 2. Okay, Proverbs chapter 2, verse 6 through 8 reads, For Yahuwah giveth wisdom out of his mouth. I'm sorry, let me reread that. I kind of phrased that wrong. For Yahuwah giveth wisdom. Out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. He layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. He keepeth the paths of judgment and preserveth the way of his saints. Okay? So Abba Yahuwah preserves the way of his saints. And essentially all the verses above that we just read, when he says he gives wisdom, out of his mouth comes knowledge and understanding, and he lays up sound wisdom for the righteous. Basically, that's talking about his commandments, okay? All his laws, statutes, commandments, and whatever other words that he gave to us, that is what Abba Yahuwah preserves for his saints, or that's how he preserves his saints, through his words, okay? His laws and commandments. Okay, so let's look at another verse to confirm that. So we'll go to Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. Okay. Revelation 12, verse 17 reads, And the dragon was wroth with the woman. And remember I told you in another video that the woman here, I believe, is referring to the Holy Spirit, which is wisdom, excuse me. And he says, or it says, And went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of Yahuwah and have the testimony of Yahusha HaMashiach. Okay? So those that keep the commandments of Yahuwah and have the testimony of Yahusha, which is Abba Yahuwah's covenant, those are the saints, okay? So that's already answering part of our question, but we'll keep moving. So let's look at Revelation 14:12. Okay? And it says, Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of Yahuwah and the faith of Yahusha. So same thing like we just said, okay? So we're seeing here that Abba Yahuwah's saints, who he preserves through his law, statutes, and commandments, they are these that keep Abba Yahuwah's commandments, and they have the faith or testimony that we saw in Revelation 12:17 of Yahusha HaMashiach, okay? So that's how I got to the answer that Abba Yahuwah's covenant is his commandments and the faith and testimony of Yahusha, okay? And then we got one more verse. So let's turn to Revelation chapter 20 and verse 4. Okay, Revelation chapter 20 verse 4 reads, And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded, for the witness of Yahusha, and for the word of Yahuwah, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads, or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Yahusha 1,000 years. Okay? So that's our answer. the day that the saints keep, the day that the saints set aside as a day of worship and rest and holy convocation, is the Sabbath. Because we saw in all three of those scriptures, Proverbs 2, 6 through 8, Revelation 12, 17, Revelation 14, 12, and Revelation 24, it said that the saints keep the commandments of Yahuwah and have the faith and testimony of Yahusha. So basically, if you want to be considered one of Abba Yahuwah's saints, one of his children that's going to be, considered worthy to receive that next world and be one of the children of the resurrection, the resurrection of the just, then you're going to be keeping Abba Yahuwah's commandments and have the testimony and faith of Yahusha. And so when it comes to choosing what day to worship on, what day that you're supposed to set aside and keep holy as a day of rest and worship to Abba Yahuwah, it's going to be the Sabbath, okay? Because that's the day that he set aside and sanctified, and that's the day that he said that when you keep it, it's a sign between you and him to show that he's your Elohim and you're his child, and that he sanctifies you, okay? That's how you're sanctified and set apart, by keeping the Sabbath. All right, so that's the end of this lesson. Apologize again for, the interruption. But anyway, just wanted to say thank you so much for coming back for another lesson. And thank you so much, Abba Yahuwah, for showing me your truth in your word so that we can know how to walk uprightly and righteously through your word, which is your law and your commandments. So thank you so much, Abba Yahuwah, for your truth so that we can repent and get right and come back into right covenant with you. So thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening. Thank you. Shalom.